Life Stories brings you another heartwarming tale of love, resilience, and acceptance. Today's story is about Eli, a young man born with a mysterious gift and a curse that made him feel like an outcast. Hidden behind sunglasses and walls of isolation, he longed for connection but feared rejection. When Mia entered his life, everything changed. Through patience, love, and understanding, she helped Eli embrace who he truly was, breaking the chains of his past. Join us as we unravel their extraordinary journey of transformation and love. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin this incredible story today. I still remember the stories my grandparents told me about Eli's parents, Mark and Sarah. They were good, hard-working people from a small American town, the kind of couple everyone admired. But their lives were weighed down by one sorrow. For over a decade, they couldn't have children. The longing for a child consumed them, and they left no stone unturned. Doctors, specialists, even herbalists. But no matter what they tried, the result was always the same: nothing. Their desperation eventually led them to seek help from a renowned spiritual healer in a distant town. His name was David, a man both feared and respected. Rumors swirled about his ability to communicate with forces beyond human understanding. Mark and Sarah arrived at David's modest house one evening, their hearts heavy with grief and hope. Sitting across from him in his dimly lit room, surrounded by symbols of ancient wisdom, they poured out their pain. David listened in silence, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "The gods hear your cries," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "They will bless you with a child. But this child will not be ordinary. He will carry the mark of the gods. A gift and a burden. Do you still wish for this child?" Mark and Sarah exchanged a glance, their desperation overwhelming any doubts. "Yes," they said in unison, their voices trembling with conviction. They would accept any child, no matter the cost. Months later, their prayers were answered. Sarah gave birth to a boy so beautiful that the midwives were left speechless. His skin was smooth and flawless, and his eyes sparkled with an otherworldly brightness. They named him Eli, meaning ascended or uplifted. To them, he was the answer to all their prayers, the missing piece of their family. At first, life seemed perfect. Eli was a happy, healthy baby. But soon, Mark and Sarah began to notice something strange. His eyes glowed faintly whenever he was particularly emotional, whether crying in anger or babbling with delight. It wasn't just a soft shimmer, it was a light that seemed to move and flicker like the scales of a serpent. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light. But as Eli grew, the glow became undeniable. The first time it happened in public, they were visiting a neighbor's house. Another child had snatched a toy from Eli, and in his rage, his eyes burned so brightly that the other children screamed and ran. The neighbors looked on in shock, and Mark and Sarah quickly made excuses before rushing home. Terrified of what people might think or say, they decided to visit David again. This time, they sought answers, not blessings. Sitting before him, they pleaded, "What have we done? How can we protect him? How can he live a normal life?" David's response was calm, almost indifferent. "The gods gave him this gift," he said. "It cannot be taken away. You made a choice, and now you must live with it. But remember, only pure love and acceptance can ease the burden of this gift." His words offered little comfort. Mark and Sarah left feeling more confused and helpless than ever. They made the difficult decision to shield Eli from the world. They homeschooled him, hired private tutors, and ensured he rarely interacted with other children. They even bought him a pair of sunglasses, which he wore at all times to hide his glowing eyes. As the years passed, Eli grew accustomed to his isolated life. Though it wasn't easy, he spent hours sitting by the large window in their living room, watching the world go by. It became his connection to the outside world, a window into a life he could never have. He watched children play, neighbors chat, and life carry on without him. One evening, as Sarah tucked him into bed, Eli looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom," he said softly, "why am I different? Why can't I be like everyone else?" Sarah's heart broke at the question. She forced a smile and stroked his hair. "Because you're special, Eli. Special in ways others can't understand." Her words were meant to comfort, but they felt hollow. Even to her. She knew that no words could truly ease the pain of feeling different, of being an outsider. By the time Eli was a teenager, he had found ways to escape his reality. He became a talented programmer, working remotely for companies across the country. His computer screen became his refuge, a place where his glowing eyes didn't matter, where he could be anyone he wanted to be. But despite his professional success, he remained lonely. His heart ached for connection, for someone who could see him for who he truly was. And then, one day, everything changed. It was a quiet afternoon when a moving truck pulled up to the house across the street. Eli watched from his usual spot by the window as a couple stepped out, followed by a girl about his age. She had smooth, dark skin, braided hair that shimmered in the sunlight, and a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire street. She laughed as she helped carry a box into the house, her voice soft but full of life. Eli couldn't take his eyes off her. He had never seen anyone like her before. There was something about her presence, her energy, that drew him in. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, a longing, a spark of hope. Over the next few days, he couldn't help but notice her more. Every morning, she watered the plants in her small garden. In the evenings, she sat on the porch, reading books and occasionally glancing up at the sky. Eli found himself drawn to her routine, her quiet joy. One afternoon, as he sat by the window pretending to read, she looked up and caught his gaze. Their eyes met, and she smiled, raising a hand in a friendly wave. Eli froze, his heart racing. He quickly ducked below the windowsill, his face burning with embarrassment. When he peeked again, she was gone. That night, he lay in bed, unable to stop thinking about her. Who was she? Why had she waved at him? Part of him longed to see her again, to connect with her. But another part was terrified. What if she noticed his glowing eyes? What if she saw him for what he truly was? The next morning, as Eli sat at the breakfast table, Sarah noticed him glancing repeatedly at the window. "What's caught your attention, Eli?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Nothing, Mom," he said quickly, but his cheeks flushed, betraying him. A few days later, fate intervened. He was at his usual spot by the window when she appeared in her garden, holding a book. She seemed engrossed in it. But then, as if sensing his gaze, she looked up and smiled again. This time, instead of running, Eli hesitated before giving her a small, tentative wave. She laughed, her voice carrying across the street. "I was starting to think you'd never wave back," she called out, her tone playful. Eli's throat went dry. Sorry," he managed to say, barely loud enough for her to hear. "I'm MIA," she said, tilting her head curiously. "And you?" "Eli," he replied, his voice trembling. "Nice to meet you." "Eli," she said warmly, "are you always hiding up there? Or will I ever see you outside?" Eli's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to explain, to tell her why he stayed inside, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, he just smiled awkwardly. For the first time in his life, someone had looked at him, spoken to him, like he was normal. And in that moment, everything began to change. MIA was unlike anyone Eli had ever met. Over the weeks that followed, their connection grew in ways he had never imagined. Their interactions were small at first, simple waves, short greetings exchanged through the open window. But slowly, they evolved into conversations. Mia's curiosity about the quiet boy across the street seemed endless. and Eli found himself looking forward to their chats more than he thought possible. Mia had a natural warmth about her, the kind of presence that made people feel safe. She didn't ask probing questions or demand answers. Instead, she shared little pieces of her own life, her favorite books, her dreams of becoming a writer, and her love for plants, which explained her thriving garden. Eli, in turn, began to let his guard down, sharing bits of himself. He told her about his work as a programmer, his love for coding, and how he often felt more at home behind a computer screen than anywhere else. "Why do you stay inside so much?" Mia asked one evening, her tone light but curious. "You're always by the window, but I've never seen you step outside." Eli hesitated. How could he explain the truth to her? That he wasn't like other people. That his very presence carried a risk. "I guess I just prefer it this way," he said finally, avoiding her gaze. Mia didn't press him. Instead, she smiled and said, "Well, at least I know where to find you." As their bond deepened, Eli found himself feeling emotions he hadn't felt in years: joy, hope, even a sense of belonging. Mia's laughter became a sound he cherished, and her smile a sight he looked forward to every day. But alongside these feelings came fear. What if she found out the truth? What if she saw his eyes, his curse, and looked at him with the same fear and rejection he had faced his entire life? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Mia looked up at him from her porch. "I want to see you," she said, her voice gentle but firm, not just the voice at the window. "You, Eli." His heart clenched. He wanted to see her too, more than anything. But the thought of stepping outside, of letting her see him as he truly was, terrified him. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said softly. Mia's gaze didn't waver. "I don't care if you're different," she said. "I just want to see you." Eli's parents were out that day, and he found himself pacing the living room, torn between fear and longing. The knock on the door came just as he was working up the courage to go back to the window. His heart skipped a beat as he peeked through the curtain. It was Mia. She stood there, her face lit with a hopeful smile. "Eli, I know you're in there," she called softly. He hesitated, his mind racing. He knew he should ignore her, but something about the way she waited, patient, unafraid, made him take a deep breath. With trembling hands, he unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, his sunglasses firmly in place. "Mia, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low. Before he could stop her, she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room curiously. "I wanted to see you," she said simply, her gaze settling on him, not just the voice at the window. "You." Eli backed away slightly, his hands shaking. I don't think this is a good idea," he stammered. Mia stepped closer, her expression gentle but unwavering. "Eli, it's okay. I know you're scared. But I'm not. Show me." Her words left him no room to argue. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached up and removed his sunglasses. For a moment, the room fell silent as his snake-like eyes glowed softly in the dim light, their eerie beauty casting a strange glow. He braced himself for her reaction, expecting fear or disgust. But to his surprise, Mia didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You have nothing to hide." Eli's chest tightened. No one had ever reacted like this before. The way she looked at him, with acceptance, not fear, stirred something deep inside him. For the first time, he felt seen. Not as a freak or a monster, but as himself. But as his emotions bubbled to the surface, something began to shift. The warmth coursing through his body became too intense, too overwhelming. Panic seized him as he felt the familiar surge of energy. "Mia, you need to leave," he said urgently, his voice trembling. "Please, go." Before she could respond, his body began to change. His limbs twisted and stretched, His skin hardened into scales. And in a matter of moments, he was no longer standing in front of her. Instead, a massive serpent loomed over the room, its golden eyes glowing with intensity. Mia's scream pierced the air as she stumbled backward, her face pale with terror. Without a second thought, she bolted out of the house, her cries echoing down the street. Eli collapsed onto the floor moments later, his body returning to its human form. He lay there trembling, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. His glowing eyes were one thing. But this transformation was something he didn't even know he was capable of. What was he? When his parents returned, they found him sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. What happened? Sarah asked. Concern etched on her face. I couldn't control it, Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to see my eyes, and I showed her. But then I transformed into a snake. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look of alarm. Eli, this changes everything, Mark said gravely. If her parents find out, they'll come for us. They'll think you're a monster. We need to leave, Sarah said, kneeling beside him. Her voice was filled with worry. Now. We can't take the risk of staying here. That evening, as Eli sat by the window one last time, he stared across the street at Mia's house. The curtains were closed, and the house was eerily silent. He waited for hours, hoping for a glimpse of her, but she didn't appear. The thought of losing her friendship, her acceptance, cut deeper than he expected. The next morning, the family packed their belongings and left the town. As they drove away, Eli watched the only place he had ever known fade into the distance. He felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. But deep down, he couldn't shake the fear. What if this wasn't the last time his transformation took over? What if he could never truly control it? And worst of all, what if he never found anyone who could accept him, not just the human, but the snake as well? The move to a new town was supposed to be a fresh start for Eli and his parents. A chance to leave behind the haunting events of their old life. But the weight of what had happened with Mia lingered in Eli's heart. Heavy and unrelenting. She had been the first person outside of his family to really see him, and her reaction had been a mix of awe and fear. It was the fear that stayed with him, gnawing at his mind, convincing him that no one could ever truly accept him for what he was. Eli and his parents settled into a modest house on the outskirts of a quiet town. Life returned to its old rhythm, homeschooling, working as a freelance programmer, and staying hidden behind the safety of his sunglasses. His parents, especially his mother, tried to make things feel normal. She would smile at him during dinner, talk about plans for the future, and assure him that things would get better. But Eli could see the worry etched in her face. The incident with Mia had shaken them all, and it was clear that his parents were just as unsure about the future as he was. For a while, Eli managed to maintain control. He avoided emotional highs and lows, sticking to a carefully constructed routine that kept his feelings in check. But then, everything changed in an instant. One late afternoon, as the family drove back from a trip to the grocery store, a truck swerved into their lane. The headlights were blinding, and the sound of screeching tires and crunching metal filled the air as their car collided with the truck, flipping over and tumbling down an embankment. When the car finally came to a halt, silence enveloped the scene, broken only by the faint sound of dripping fuel and Eli's ragged breathing. He tried to move, but pain shot through his body. "Mom! Dad!" he called out, his voice weak and trembling. There was no response. The next thing Eli remembered was waking up in a hospital bed, the stark white walls and beeping monitors disorienting him. A nurse stood by his side, her face somber. "You're lucky to be alive," she said softly. "But I'm so sorry your parents didn't make it." The words hit Eli like a blow, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. Grief, anger, and guilt surged through him all at once. But he forced it down, locking it away. He couldn't afford to lose control, not here. Not now. The days that followed were a blur. Eli stayed in the hospital, his injuries slowly healing. But the pain of losing his parents didn't fade. It wasn't just the grief, it was the guilt. He blamed himself for their deaths, convinced that if he hadn't been a burden, they wouldn't have had to uproot their lives and leave their home. One day, as he sat staring out the hospital window, a woman walked into his room. She was in her late 40s or early 50s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. "Hello, Eli," she said, pulling up a chair beside his bed. "My name is Emily. I'm one of the nurses here." Eli nodded but didn't say anything. He had grown accustomed to the pitying looks from the hospital staff, and he assumed she was no different. But Emily wasn't just a nurse. She had grown up steeped in the traditions of her father, a man who had been known as a healer and spiritual guide in their community. While she didn't practice his craft, she had inherited his wisdom and his understanding of things beyond the ordinary. And when she looked at Eli, she saw something familiar. "You don't have to hide from me," she said gently, her eyes meeting his. "I know what you are." Eli stiffened, his heart racing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice barely audible. Emily smiled, unshaken by his denial. "Your eyes. I've seen them before. My father dealt with someone like you many years ago. You're not a monster, Eli. You're just different." Her words caught him off guard. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, not with understanding, not with acceptance. For the first time since the accident, he felt a small flicker of hope. Over the next few weeks, Emily helped Eli recover not just physically, but emotionally as well. She taught him techniques to manage his emotions, simple breathing exercises, meditation, and ways to recognize when he was nearing his breaking point. "It's not about fighting it," she explained. "It's about staying calm, like managing any other condition." Eli listened, and slowly, he began to see progress. The transformation didn't happen again, though the fear of it always lingered. Emily became something of a mother figure to him, guiding him with patience and care. But even as he regained a sense of stability, the walls around his heart grew higher. Losing his parents had been devastating, and he vowed never to let anyone get close enough to hurt him again. Years passed, and Eli built a life for himself. He moved to a bustling city, where he worked as a successful software developer. His sunglasses became his shield, and his careful control became second nature. He kept people at arm's length, never allowing anyone to see the real him. His colleagues whispered about him, calling him the handsome psycho or the blind boss. Eli ignored them. Loneliness was a small price to pay for safety. But deep down, he was tired of hiding, tired of running, and tired of being alone. He told himself he was fine, that he didn't need anyone. But the truth was, he longed for connection. He just didn't believe it was possible. And then, one day, she walked back into his life. In the end, Eli and MIA proved that love could transcend fear, isolation, and even the impossible. Their journey wasn't easy, filled with moments of heartbreak, doubt, and transformation, but it was one of resilience and unwavering acceptance. MIA never saw Eli's differences as flaws, she embraced every part of him, human and serpent alike. Her love taught him that his identity wasn't something to hide or fear but a testament to his strength and uniqueness. On their wedding night, when his emotions triggered another transformation, MIA didn't flinch. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his serpent form, whispering words of love and acceptance. It was that moment, her unconditional embrace, that reversed the curse forever. Leaving Eli fully human, their life together became a blend of the extraordinary and the ordinary: morning coffees, shared laughter, and small disagreements about whose turn it was to do the dishes. Eli learned to live without fear, and together, they built a future filled with joy, understanding, and love. Their story reminds us all that true love isn't about perfection, It's about seeing someone completely and loving them anyway. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales.